Rather than to hear it all, it's like, well, what do we want to discuss? Because there's always something going on somewhere. For instance, we've got the potential at the moment of a volcanic event of some kind that we're seeing, in which the bowel and the bladder of the planet are going to ooze. Now, these are the words that came out.
Ooze.
I have a tendency to take references to body parts and body processes very, very, very seriously in our work, because there are typical at a level that there is no primary level higher than that, insofar as humans are concerned.
Interesting.
So when we say we have a heartache, we are expressing something, naming a body part that is truly an emotional condition that does not even necessarily relate to our pumping heart. But you get the point.
How would you interpret that, Cliff? Where might that happen? Because I know oozing takes place in Hawaii, takes place in Greenland, takes place over in Europe.
The oozing apparently is the aftermath of the appearance of this upset of the bowel and the bladder. Now, it's anybody's guess as to what the bowel and the bladder, but obviously, or at least to my mind right off the top, it suggested to me some new kind of volcanic activity where the bowels of the earth are going to spit out and ooze a bunch. And now we're hearing, curiously, rumors about, and I can only say the rumors, they're not substantiated, although the locals apparently say that it's a reasonably normal condition for the last few weeks. The area of Pakistan where they had that quake has been reporting sulfurous smells and steam and ash and this kind of thing, without any real appearance of a volcano. And now, antipodal to that, in a slight offset of a great circle, we now have the Galapagos Island popping off with its volcano. So is one the bowel and the other the bladder of the earth? I don't know. You see, that's our real problem. If we'd had a 50 or 60-year history of computers on this planet and had a time to amass this sort of stuff and work in isolation and finally lay it all out, then you could get up with a fairly decent predictive engine, I think. But we're having to do a lot of this stuff as we go along.
Had you, before the Pakistani earthquake, had you picked it up?
We picked it up ever since January.
As Pakistan, or just
No. That's the issue. We don't have geographic references because we probably get 161,000 references in any given run to Pakistan.
Okay, all right.
And we just don't know when one is meaningful and one isn't, so we throw them all out.
Yeah, my gosh.
But we did have descriptions that pretty much fit the circumstances, and all the words that we saw show up as precursors in January have been used in describing this event, and the emotional release level of 79,000 plus people sliding down the hillside to be buried in the valleys pretty much was what was showing up.
Absolutely. And now they're thinking as many, as 150,000 people, and yet they will never know, because some of the villages way deep inside the country they can never get to.
Correct. And we're seeing a lot of the references that we had that described this were things about people having to live on broken and abandoned road surfaces.
Gosh.
And having to leave goods behind as they hiked along because there was no wheeled transportation.
Yeah.
Now, for a long time, we thought that was related to a plate shift, and what we were actually looking at was a description of a coastal city. Why was this? Well, it was because one of the key things we kept seeing was that there was going to be a slide down into water. And, of course, the major area that slid, this area of 250 kilometers, slid down into a giant river area. And we were just misreading it as coastal, because when it comes up with water, there's so many water references at our typical levels that it's kind of a shot in the dark if we're going to get the right one.
Yeah, wow. And it brings up the question, is it possible that this might fulfill, I was going to say what the prediction of the earthquake in California was, but it's no, that doesn't fit. No, that's a different set of circumstances entirely. George Ure has this he's a nice guy, and he's got this good way of thinking about things, right, especially about this, and he visualizes it this way, that we're sitting here in a dark theater looking at a giant TV screen upon which multiple movies are being played simultaneously. Right.
And so it is difficult for us, we can see all the action, but it's difficult for us to pick out which action is associated with which locality from which movie. And to a certain extent, his analogy is a very good profound one, because it presents some of the difficulties that I run into in extracting some of this stuff.
Jeez. Where can you see, let's say, in the next 3 to 6 months, because many people have written in asking about like the metals market. Should they buy gold? Should they buy silver? And many have asked about the market in general, although we've talked about this for the past couple of months.
It's going to be bad economically.
Yeah.
We're seeing a huge rise in negatively associated long-term, short-term, and immediate values, and depth and intensity values associated with all things economic. Global economic recession or depression certainly would fit what we're seeing in the way of a release. Now let me stop for a second and frame a context for you. When Katrina hit, we were sort of told about it on a Friday. It kind of missed New Orleans on a Monday, and then we started having the what we termed the serious release event that started on a Tuesday and ran until the subsequent Tuesday, when things sort of quasi-returned, at least in reportorial terms, to normal.
Right.
So that release event was over the course of, let's just say, 10 days. Now what we're looking at is a release event where emotionally it will take much longer to discharge the level of emotions and work it all out mentally, if you will. So does this imply that the event itself will play out over a long period of time, like the aftermath of the Katrina storm? Yes, it does. Does it imply a trigger event? Not necessarily, but most likely, rather than... but at this point, what we're looking at may be an accumulation of a lot of little triggers, get everything quivering to the point where it all sort of collapses, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is that there's a period of time very near the end of November, and starting with some certainty around December 3rd, and then once again around December 14th, in which after December 14th, it's all downhill for maybe 6 months after that, until really the next building period. I think I'm going to have to refresh my screen here, but I don't think it shows up with any seriousness until the end of May.
Now, when you say a rebuilding process, are you saying that somewhere, let's say end of November, beginning of December, we could have a physically a devastating event that could destroy a major portion of the country, and we have to go back to rebuilding?
No. By rebuilding, I'm sorry. I'm talking about things in an emotional sense. So I'm talking about a building period of where everybody is emotionally just exhausted from World War II, and so the 50s were a building period.
Do you foresee, Cliff, any specific type of, let's say, disaster for end of November, beginning of December? Is it only economic? Is it only emotional?
Impact is going to be economic, but we can't rule out that it would indeed be, and in fact the probability suggests greater than 50% that its origin will be a external to the system trigger, such as a hurricane or a series of hurricanes or earthquakes or something.
And that's going to trigger the economic collapse.
And it's going to trigger a release. Basically, we have our first release trigger sometime in showing up here around before 11:14, and the beginning of our scale is 11:7. So around 11:7 or 11:8, we have a release trigger cluster where we've got a high probability of all kinds of words showing up clustered around that date. Then we have another little tiny building period up in the middle of November where, if you will, think of it as people getting tense again after some kind of an emotional event.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, and then around the 21st, we have another little release. And then there's a step downward, so it's going to take us maybe around the 21st, the release event appears to take about 7 to 8 days to play out emotionally. Then there's a slight building period again up to about the 3rd of December, a little bit of a downward, and then slight build up to December 14th, and then it's all down from there. Now, a lot of the stuff that we see in the release is economically focused. That doesn't mean it will be the only impact. It's just that at this point, that's the dominant one.
Right.
Just as, with Katrina, it's anybody's guess at this stage. I would say that it may be fair to make the statement that in the immediacy of the event, money doesn't matter, but over the longer period of time, it is the way in which you really track how hard it hits you.
Do you see, Cliff, an emotional event possibly similar to, let's say, the emotional release of 9/11?
Oh, bigger than that.
Bigger than that?
Yeah.
Ay, 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 caramba.
We have right now the release period for 9/11 was very intense. It basically lasted about 2.5 to 3 weeks at a very high level of intensity, and then rapidly faded off and dispersed. And then it got all jumbled up in the emotional chaos that became the war in Iraq. Now,
Wow. Okay.
the release and let me put that into context.
Yeah.